Thursday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. I hope you're having a great afternoon. NFL draft just a week away. Round one will be next Thursday. Browns won't get involved, barring a trade, until next Friday. Andrew Berry met with the media for his pre-draft media gathering, talked about Nick Chubb's progress as well as the restructured contract.
With Nick in his rehab, I think you guys have heard me say he's really attacked it very aggressively, really since he's been able to in the fall. He's going at a good pace. It's still early. He actually started, running on land, this past week. That's not to say that, he's through the woods or anything, but he's doing everything in his power. He's progressing appropriately, but certainly the next few weeks, next few months will be big as we continue to increase the load that he's able to put on his knee, and then how much he's ultimately able to do during his training. I won't comment in detail on the contract, other than to say that I think that whenever you go through a situation like that, I think people think it's easy for like a club and agent to be adversarial, and with Nick's situation, I really applaud Nick and then his reps Todd Franson and AJ Stevens for being really collaborative partners and finding a solution that worked for everybody. I think everybody in this room is happy that Nick is back as a Cleveland Brown, and we're very optimistic that he's going to crush the rehab.
With that, let's welcome in Quincy Carrier, Untitled Unfiltered Browns coverage. Quincy, this was the outcome we expected, but I talk a little bit about that. Then, what are realistic expectations for Nick Chubb coming back from that injury?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what we thought would happen with Nick Chubb. We know that he's somebody who puts in the work in the offseason, regardless of if he's coming back from an injury. A lot of what rehabbing an injury is working out. We know Nick Chubb's great at working out. That's why he was able to bounce back from that knee injury he had in college. It sounds like he's going to be able to bounce back strong from here, and that he's reasonably ahead of schedule, not so far ahead that it gets concerning, right? When like Aaron Rodgers is talking about coming back for like 2 months after Achilles tear. That would be concerning if he were that ahead of schedule, if you're talking about playing or practicing right now. But, he's in a good place. As far as the expectations for Nick Chubb, I think it's going to be more situational than it's going to be more about the cumulative numbers, right? I think we're all kind of expecting that this might be a year where the cumulative numbers aren't great on Nick Chubb, or aren't what we expect from Nick Chubb, just because he's working back from this, and that, he might not get as many carries as he might have gotten in the years previous. But with him this year, you want to still feel like he's still an option on 3rd and short, that if you need to pound the game away late with 3 minutes left on the clock or 5 minutes left on the clock, that he could be a reliable option. Just those kind of things, if that's still there, it would still feel like Nick Chubb, and you'll still have what you need from Nick Chubb. And I think as he comes back from this injury, his role is going to be reduced a little bit, just because the Browns are moving in a more attacking direction on the offensive side of the ball. You just want Nick Chubb to be able to, be father time back there, right? If you need to kill 5 minutes, you got Nick Chubb there to kill 5 minutes.
All right. So Greg Newsome's 5th-year option is due in a few weeks. Andrew Berry was asked specifically about Greg Newsome and what his long-term future would be with the Browns.
I want as many good corners as possible, Tony. We have. Going back to my point about the league playing in 11 personnel, I always, your base offense and defense is really more 3 receivers and 3 corners in this day and age. So that's really how we think about it. Like, even though we're technically a 4-3, how many snaps will you realistically see us play in base? Not very many over the course of the season. So corner is a premium position. We have 3 guys who can play press man coverage at a very, very, very high level. That's not a skill set that I'm looking to give away.
Hey, Quincy, I wouldn't be surprised if they find a way to get him to a 2nd contract, because press man coverage is what helps Jim Schwartz create chaos at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, it's your ultimate counter against what teams do against Myles Garrett, right? They want to throw the ball quickly. They don't want to hold on to it. Okay, well, if you got guys who could stick at the line of scrimmage and really disrupt that timing, then that means that they're going to have low completion percentages. And we saw this year where they had multiple players on Ryan Tannehill and that poor gentleman that had to play for the Arizona Cardinals that one day. I forgot his name already, but held them under 100 yards passing. They did the same thing with Joe Burrow, right? Like that's part of the key to the dominance of the Cleveland Browns defense is, okay, you don't want to hold the ball on because you don't want to get sacked by Myles Garrett. Okay, cool. We're going to force you to throw into these corners who are dangerous and have good ball instincts. I know people have been pushing the Greg Newsome trade rumors because the Browns could get a pick out of it. But the Browns are not at the place right now where they're going to be valuing these picks down the line. What they're going to value over the next couple of years is what makes the Browns better. And there's no trade out there I think you can make that makes the Browns better by not having Greg Newsome on your roster.
Yeah, Clayton. What is Clayton Tune? Is the poor gentleman who was playing quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. Barry also addressed Deshaun Watson and where he is during his offseason rehab and the offseason during his rehab in the offseason program.
We have a regular cadence, regular checkpoints, Tom. This week, Deshaun was throwing up to 40 yards. Like he's in a pretty good spot. Again, like I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse. Thank you. But he's progressing, as appropriate. We're really, really pleased with the work that he's put in and really pleased with how the shoulder's responding. But we're still in the middle of a rehab process. So we know that it can take, different, left and right turns, but we're pretty optimistic in terms of what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and Quincy, that's the thing. No quarterback has come back from that injury. That's the scary part. The good thing is Deshaun Watson is doing all the things that they want him to do.
Yeah, and there's just not a history of a ton of quarterbacks who have had that injury, right? It's kind of like ACL tears where it seemed like the boogeyman injury for a while, but medicals and time and experience kind of caught up to that, to where it's something that we expect players to come back from on a consistent basis now, right? So we'll see what happens with Deshaun and his rehab progress. You just want to see him go through the steps in the offseason. And as long as we get to the second week of camp and he's throwing the ball, like if he can do joint practices, I don't think he's going to play in the preseason because why at this point, right? He's already knocked the rust off. Like this isn't like 2022 or something where he hasn't played in a while. So I don't expect him to play in the preseason, but you do want him to be out there in camp very often. And you want him to, at least towards the end of camp, not feel like he's on a passing restriction, because what you don't want to do if you're the Cleveland Browns is rush this and end up with a running back that you have to have on a pitch count and a quarterback that you have to have on a pitch count. So you got to be careful. They're going to play this thing conservatively. They're going to do this so that they can be at full go to start the season, because they need both of those guys, Nick Chubb and Deshaun Watson, to be able to kind of carry a full load, or at least one of them to carry a full load come the start of September.
Browns did make a roster move, signed a veteran free agent offensive lineman, Jermaine Ifedi. 59 career starts at right tackle, 24 career starts at right guard, former first-round pick. Last year spent most of the season on the Bills' active roster, but didn't appear in a game. Just 29 years old, so some depth and some pretty good depth on the offensive line there.
Yeah, I think this is competition for James Hudson, who's still, I think, on the roster to be that swing tackle / guard guy, and also somebody who can, compete to be tackle eligible when the Browns go to those packages. And we know the Browns love going to the tackle eligible packages. Also, just insurance, right? There's a lot of good tackles in this draft. I think it stops around the 4th round. The Browns don't have a 4th round pick, so you don't want to feel like you got to be forced to take a tackle if you want to have somebody who can fill that role. And if you can't get your hands on a Christian Jones, a Kingsley Sumatia, a Roger Rosengarten, then you feel fine with having Jermaine Ifedi kind of fill that role for the team, or at least competing to fill that role.
Quincy Carrier and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, Andrew Barry will talk a little bit about the depth at tackle. Will the Browns hang on to it? Sports for CLE. I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns with Quincy Carrier from Untitled, Unfiltered Browns coverage. Andrew Berry, during his pre-draft media gathering, was asked, with Jack Conklin, Jedrick Wills, and DeJuan Jones, 3 starting caliber tackles, does he and do the Browns view that as a positive in roster building?
I do. And like we've probably seen that in particular 2 out of the 4 years that we've been here, where I think maybe 1 or 2 teams in the league end up having their starting 5 play the whole season on a given year. So, and that's one of the positions where once you get into the season, it's hard to acquire them. Like the big guys, they're hard to acquire once you get into camp. So, tackle's a premium position. We have good ones. Again, in no hurry to give anyone away.
And Quincy, I wouldn't be surprised in the least if they take one in the 3rd round, if they trade for a 4th round pick. I don't think they'll use their 2nd round pick on it. But think about it. Think about how often you see tackles getting beat up. And I'm sure if you had a 3rd one and you can lighten the load of all 3 of them, all 3 of them would be on board for that.
You can never have too many tackles, right? Like I think that's a constant on football teams, because what you don't want to have is not have enough tackles, right? Once you don't have enough tackles, we've seen what that looks like. You down to Garyon Christian, and Garyon Christian get ran on 2.5 seconds, and it just is what it is. You can't really run that many plays. What Kevin Stefanski wants to do and wants to be able to maintain is that no matter who's at quarterback, no matter what goes down with the team, is that he's able to access the larger parts of this playbook, the bulk of the playbook. What kills parts of the playbook is when you cannot block, right? When you cannot block up front, when you have a leak at the tackle or guard or center positions. So I think it's always smart for a team to overload a offensive line room, because that guarantees that even if you do have a couple of injuries up front, you still have access to all of the avenues and plays that you want to be able to attack a team. And the more flexibility you have during the game, the more chances you have to win, and the better your chance is to win.
Yeah, I think about the job Andrew Berry did last year. They were playing their 4th and 5th tackles. He just told you it's hard to find big guys. And Garyon Christian was pretty good his first couple of starts, but that's the thing with guys that are 3rd, 4th, and 5th tackles. There are parts of their game that get exposed, and that's what happened as he started into his 3rd, 4th game. The parts of his game that weren't where it needed to be got exposed.
Yeah, it's just tough when you don't have quality tackle play out there, or when you're stretched so thin that you have guys that are virtually coming off the street to come play for you, right? Like, it's just tough to kind of maintain, run your whole plays. I think the thing that suffered even when Garyon Christian came in, I mean, up until Jed Wills got hurt, is look at the run production. Look how inefficient that run game got after Jed Wills and DeJuan Jones got hurt, and how ineffective it was. Like, it just completely stripped away that part of the Browns game. And that's really something that led them into that turnover, that high volatility turnover rate with Joe Flacco, because we're asking him to throw 45, 55 times a game. And that's just the interceptions are just going to come with that.
All right, NFL power rankings before the NFL draft. This from NFL.com. Chiefs 1, 49ers 2, Ravens 3, Lions 4, Bills in at 5, which surprised me a little bit. Packers 8, Bengals 9, Cowboys 10, Dolphins 11. They have the Browns checking in at 12. So behind the Cowboys and the Dolphins, just ahead of the Steelers. Quincy, I know you've kind of addressed this. Are the Browns one of the most underrated teams in the NFL, do you think?
I think they are. Look, this team has a lot of things in it that, if you look at it just objectively, you'd be like, wow, that's going to probably be a good team, right? They have continuity with their roster, but not just continuity with the roster. They have a very talented roster. And, like, proven talent, right? We're not talking about, oh, we're thinking that JOK is going to take a leap here or he's going to live up to his draft potential. We're talking about guys who have already done the work, right? JOK has already, played at a Pro Bowl level. The same thing can be said for Grant Delpit, David Njoku. Obviously, Myles Garrett has not just played at a Pro Bowl level. He's been an all-pro pretty much his whole career and then just won Defensive Player of the Year. So he's playing at an all-time level now. And you have the offensive line that's full of really good players. Like, you have a ton of proven NFL talent. And not only is that talent proven, they're veteran players who are in their mid to late 20s, which is the exact kind of range that you wanted. You add that on top of a coaching staff that's not just experienced, but well-respected and seems to be very good, right? You got 3 Coach of the Year awards within that staff between just your defensive coach and your head coach. And then you have Ken Dorsey, who has had good quarterback play and good offenses everywhere that he's been. So you have a ton of good coaches. You have a ton of good players. These players are experienced, and they're not just experienced. They weren't assembled this year. The teams that rely on people to start mainly from guys they got in March and April, those are never the teams we talk about in January and February. The teams that fly under the radar during this time, like the Browns are, because they have a ton of continuity, they have a ton of talent, they don't really need to make those giant changes. Those are the teams that you always have to watch out for, because those are the teams that have the continuity, the experience, and the experience with each other to be able to do what needs to be done in those later months to become Super Bowl contenders.
Is it fair enough, simple enough that, people that are ranking them in the middle of the pack there, 12 is pretty much middle of the pack, they want to see it's a prove it. Deshaun Watson, prove it to me. Prove to me you're back.
Yeah, and the Deshaun Watson thing is a little weird to me because I think I think people have put his play in a category of bad that I don't think it really belonged in. Like, I thought it was above average. It wasn't great. It wasn't spectacular. It wasn't awful. It was slightly above average. And also, I think people are making assumptions that, hey, if Deshaun Watson doesn't play well, this team won't be good, that just aren't true, because those assumptions are based in his salary. And the reason that would matter, his salary, is because, hey, you're saying Deshaun Watson has to carry this team because they don't have much around him. That assumption is not true, right? This roster has a ton around Deshaun Watson. So if that's not the case, then I think people are overestimating or overvaluing Deshaun Watson's play and how that's going to affect the Cleveland Browns in a negative way, because Deshaun Watson can have a bone average year this year. The Browns could still be the 1 seed.
All right. Again, I know you've addressed this on your show. What can we expect from Jerry Jeudy? What is realistic to expect from Jerry Jeudy?
I think you want to see Jerry Jeudy be somebody who creates big plays downfield, right? You want to see some explosives out of Jerry Jeudy. You know that Amari Cooper's good for him every once in a while, but Amari Cooper's more who you want to rely on to move the sticks. You want to see Jerry Jeudy be a guy that allows you to score in 2 to 3 minutes more consistently. You want to see Jerry Jeudy be a guy who can spark a drive because he gets a big play on 3rd and 7. That's kind of what you want out of Jerry Jeudy. He's a number 2 receiver, but he's probably the guy that you're going to lean on to be your most explosive receiver in the bunch. Obviously, Elijah Moore is going to be part of that, but you want Jerry Jeudy to be a big part of that. And I think that's where you see those expectations kind of grow for Jerry Jeudy. I don't expect the numbers for him to be 1,300 yards. I think the numbers will be kind of around where they've been with him, 900 to 1,000 yards. But you want to see that consistency, and you want to see some big playability from Jerry Jeudy. And I think if you get that, and he's being a good team player, running some routes that allows other guys to get open, and still being fine with that role, then you're going to have a pretty good year for him.
Quincy Carrier from Untitled Unfiltered Browns Coverage, and I'm going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, more from Andrew Berry talking about Deshaun Watson and that contract. Sports for CLE. Be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Quincy Carrier from Untitled Unfiltered Browns coverage. Andrew Berry today. Ask about the Deshaun Watson trade and the comments he made being a longer-term view of it than in just the short term.
I think the one thing that's pretty unique about the quarterback position in our sport is, when you find a good one, they're typically with your franchise for a long period of time. So when I say 10 years, maybe I didn't mean it quite as literally as you're taking it, but for a very long period of time, because that player at that position, can really anchor your franchise and anchor your organization on the field. So as we think about it, it's less about a yearly fluctuation, but very much with a long-term focus. Because look, quarterbacks, they're not all Tom Brady playing until they're 45, but quarterbacks in this league, they play to their mid and late 30s, and that's an incredibly valuable player to have.
So you are beyond this one contract when you think of that?
Yes, sure, Jeff. Yeah.
Quincy, you get this feeling. I get the feeling just in listening to Andrew Berry. They'd do that trade again, and I thought that in listening to him, I believe it even more.
Yeah, I think that they made that trade for reasons that are a little bit bigger than what people kind of assume for the Cleveland Browns. The truth is, with the Deshaun Watson trade, the way Andrew Berry's going to judge it is, hey, how many windows does this player give me at the quarterback position? And if Deshaun Watson, he's already in that first window, right? We can all say that these last 2 years were the first window. If you can get to a second or third window with Deshaun Watson under contract as a quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, that will be viewed as a success for Andrew Berry, because he traded for a quarterback to extend the championship window and to be able to think, hey, I want to be able to rebuild a team, be down for a couple of years, but then get back to it because we know we have a quarterback that could play at that level. So, yeah, if you get another window out of Deshaun Watson after this set of this window, then I think that they feel like that trade's a success.
Some more free agent news. Browns reportedly visit with Titans, unrestricted free agent tight end Trevin Wesco from Aaron Wilson. Has played in the NFL 5 years, 69 career games, started 23. More of a blocking guy, just 9 career receptions, 134 yards. And again, Quincy, we know they're looking for tight ends. I wouldn't dismiss that because it looks like he's a blocking tight end just based on the number of starts and receptions.
Yeah, this is kind of goes along with the Jermaine Ifedi one, right? They know that they have roles on the team that could potentially be available, but they won't want to fall into the trap of drafting somebody specifically because they feel that role that they need right now. They want to be in a position where they can think long-term about each and every draft pick that they bring in and not feel like their hand is forced just because they need a guy who could be potentially tight end 3 or 4 in camp, right? So they're bringing in some of these guys before the draft to make sure they're not in that position, that pressure is not there for them to take somebody at a certain position late in the draft or to hold on to a pick just so they can get somebody late in the draft. They want to be able to have that flexibility. I think this is a move to make sure they can have that flexibility, with tight end 3 being something that we're going to be looking at for this team.
Yeah, the other thing is we're talking that jumps out. Tight ends, fullbacks, linebackers, those are going to be the guys with the new kickoff rules that are playing on the front line on both sides. The linebackers will play when you're on the defense because the kickoff rules are going to put you 10 yards away from the line of scrimmage. So that might be why you're looking at tight ends like that as well. They'll have a role on special teams.
Yeah, I think the waiver wire is going to be fascinating this year with the one cut down, because I think teams genuinely have no clue what's going to happen with this new kickoff rule. So we're going to see a bunch of scrambling where it's like, I don't know okay, that didn't work. So maybe we bring in 5 linebackers and then that doesn't work. So I think there's going to be a ton of dudes on the waiver wire this year that might have not hit it just because teams are going to be scrambling to figure out this whole kickoff thing. Because usually, like with a rule like this, they would test it in a preseason and then play it. but they're going straight ahead with this rule. So I think we're going to see some scrambling from front offices.
Yeah, you're right. I think week 2 it could be bad. That didn't work. Let's bring in a whole new group and figure it out.
You're right. It might happen during the season too, right? Where coverages start to get busted. Like, all right, we need to change up the strategy.
All right, this from Bleacher Report, grading every team's offseason before the 2024 draft. For the Browns, remaining team needs: linebacker, cornerback, and edge. I'm not sure how many. I'm not sure how many cornerbacks they want, but they say cornerbacks. Remaining cap space. $14.4 million. What's impressive about the Browns offseason is the fact they were able to fill out most of their needs to get to the draft without restructuring Deshaun Watson's contract. Best thing about their approach is they are set up in the draft to target long-term needs and depth. They have the current answers for each of their remaining needs and can draft with 2025 and beyond in mind. Grade B. Yeah, how many cornerbacks do they need? And that it's just destroying the thought that the Deshaun Watson contract was going to kill them for X amount of years.
Yeah, the fact that they did all this without restructuring too, right? And they're going to probably restructure later on in the offseason just to have the rollover cap. But yeah, it's a great job by Andrew Berry. Andrew Berry and, his work that he did with the Philadelphia Eagles, he's kind of brought that over to Cleveland. They're kind of ahead of a lot of trends in the NFL. And, shout out to the Haslams for being willing to spend the cash necessary to be able to make this happen, right? If the Browns were a team that wasn't as cash rich as they are, they would be in cap trouble right now. The Deshaun Watson contract would be an issue, but you signed that contract with Deshaun Watson with the idea that you would do something like this to mitigate it, and it's working right now for the Cleveland Browns. So that's just good planning. That's Deep Podesta. That's long-term planning, which is his job. I know people act like they don't know what he does, but this is part of it, right? The Deep Podesta, the Andrew Berry, the Kevin Stefanski of it all. And this is just it paying off, just having that long-term planning, because while people thought when the Browns signed Deshaun Watson that contract, it was very short-sighted. What it was a long-term play, and that long-term play is actually benefiting them in the long run.
Yeah, and now, you just hope he can get on the field and provide the type of quarterback play they expected out of him. All right. This one, I kind of chuckled at this. NFL Rumors tweet this out. Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin reportedly would like to trade for 49ers wide receiver Brandon Ayuk, according to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He'd probably like to trade for Justin Jefferson, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase as well. But I think there's probably 31 teams that want to trade for Brandon Ayuk.
It's that time of the year, right? It's that I got nothing to write about, so let me just say something that sounds like I got something. Yeah, I'm sure the Steelers would love to get Brandon Ayuk, but do they have the ammunition to go get him? Are they willing to make the sacrifices that it takes to go get Brandon Ayuk? And do they want to spend the money on Brandon Ayuk that Brandon Ayuk would demand? Those are the bigger questions there. You're always going to hear, especially during this time of the year before the draft. And look, it's going to happen again in June and July. You're always going to hear these kind of crazy rumors about a team wanting to go after somebody. I'm pretty sure you're going to hear that somebody wants to trade for Stephon Diggs again after he already got traded for, right? You're just going to hear all this stuff. But realistically, you have to kind of ask the serious questions of okay, does that actually work? Why would they do that? Why would it make sense for San Francisco or Pittsburgh to do that? And does Pittsburgh have the ammunition and money to make that happen? And I think that's where it starts to get far-fetched. But yeah, I'm sure Mike Tomlin would love to be add another wide receiver,
Would you give up first-round picks? They certainly are going to want one. Would you give up one plus something to get Brandon Ayuk? I don't know.
They're a team that has a history of doing well at developing wide receivers. So I don't get why, if they have that track record, if they think they have that infrastructure in place offensively to be able to develop wide receivers, why they would feel it necessary to trade that much for somebody who could be a good wide receiver. They've literally just traded away a good one in Deontay Johnson. They have George Pickens. I just don't see why they would do it. And also, we got to be honest about where the Steelers are right now. They're just not a win now team, and they've never been a team, even when they are in win now mode, to make these big moves. So it wouldn't be head scratching to me to think that they would make that kind of a play. It's just out of character for Pittsburgh for them to do.
Yeah, and they have a pick in the late first round, and this draft is loaded with playmakers at wide. I would expect them more to go get a wide receiver in the draft, and instead of drafting an offensive lineman, go sign a veteran lineman in free agency.
Yeah, they have a lot of different avenues to get there, and I think what Omar Khan is ultimately going to weigh in this decision is that, does Brandon Ayuk really make us that much of a better football team? And Brandon Ayuk is a great player, but I don't think they have the quarterback play on that team necessary to be able to take advantage of his skill set at wide receiver. So I don't know if that will be something that benefits them, because Brandon Ayuk is as good as he is. He does need solid quarterback play to get the ball, because he's a downfield kind of route runner guy. He's not a Deebo Samuels just tossing the ball and he can just make something happen type of wide receiver. He needs that solid quarterback play in order for him to be at his best. And I'm not 100% sure that that's guaranteed that you're going to get that from Pittsburgh this year.
Quincy Carrier and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we turn our attention specifically to the draft just a week away. Andrew Berry about how soon draft picks can be expected to contribute. Sports for CLE, be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns with Quincy Carrier from Untitled Unfiltered Browns coverage. Andrew Berry at his media gathering today talked about how soon a draft pick can realistically be expected to contribute.
You know, for instance, O-line and D-line, they're typically longer developing positions. You know, running back, that's a position that typically plays, you know, more quickly, but that can be variable depending on, hey, was this player a small school prospect that didn't have a ton of resources? Is he relatively new to the position? Is he relatively new to the sport? You know, so that all can play a factor. I think what I would say is pretty consistent is that just like the transition from college to the NFL for rookies in general, regardless of where you're taking, it's hard. I wish I had the statistic off the top of my head, but I think it was something like maybe 32% of rookies play an average of 17 snaps a game, and that's before you even get to the quality of snaps that they're playing. So it's very rare that you know, a young player comes right out of the chute and produces like a starter. You know, which is why we prefer to be in a roster state where if we bring a young player aboard, they can develop into a role and then ultimately develop into a starter as opposed to being pressed into that from day one.
Quincy, the other thing is playoff teams tend to play less rookies than teams that are 2-14, for instance. When you look at, though, what are the Browns' actual draft needs as they go into this?
I really got them. Like if we're talking about like true needs, right? Like you need somebody to step in and fill a role or to play right away. I just don't see that the Browns have any area where they have. This goes back to what we talked about earlier. This is not only a very talented team, a very deep team, but a veteran team. And you're not going to really find a lot of rooms on those kind of teams for somebody to start right away. And that's just not where the Cleveland Browns are. They have some positions where they project to need a starter in a couple of years, like the offensive line. But for right now, there's nobody that they need right now. Even if like Keon Coleman fell to them at 54 and they really loved him, it's not like he's in a situation where he's going to get a ton of reps in year one, right? Because he's still going to be behind Cedric Tillman. He's still going to be behind Elijah Moore. He's still going to be behind Amari Cooper. He's still going to be behind Jeudy. And then if we're talking in order of targets, almost everybody but Amari Cooper is going to be behind David Njoku.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned the offensive line. Who do you think is the best offensive lineman for the Browns in the draft?
I think that there are a number of guys, depending on which round you pick in, right? If you're going in the second round, I think Roger Rosengarten makes sense. If you feel like he can make the transition to the left, that's going to have to do with a lot of your individual workouts. I don't think the Browns are leaning that way because they haven't brought him in for an individual workout. And if you were trying to project somebody to go from left to right, you really want to bring them in for an individual workout. So Kingsley Samatatia seems like somebody that's on the radar in the second round. If you're going to go back as far as like the third or fourth round, I would go with somebody like Christian Jones out of Texas. The tape is really nice. Did a good job flipping from left to right at the Senior Bowl. Again, somebody you want to bring in to make sure he can make that transition in the NFL. But I think he showed enough fluidity on both sides to where you wouldn't be worried about that with him. If you're looking at interior prospects, Christian Haynes is somebody that's going to be interesting. Connor Beebe from Kansas State is somebody that you can keep an eye on. And also Bo Limmer out of Arkansas is somebody you want to watch.
Yeah, and when you look at it, we talked a little bit about this earlier. The tackles are younger, and I was surprised. Jack Conklin's only 29. I know he's been physically beat up, but Jones is still second year. Jedrick Wills is young. It's the guards and the centers that are a little bit older, and you can get those guys later in the draft. What about the best wide receivers for the Browns in the draft? I'm curious as to, when you look at that, who you think.
I think this is where me and Andrew Berry will have a differing mindset when it comes to this position. I want to get somebody bigger, right? Because I just don't think that the Browns have anybody who really plays in that style. I know people will point out Cedric Tillman, but Cedric Tillman's more of an athlete than he is a big body wide receiver. I want somebody who can kind of box out, be physical, use their length and stretch down there. I think Keon Coleman can do a good job of doing that, and Xavier Leggett can also. If you're asking me what I think Andrew Berry likes, I think Andrew Berry would love if Xavier Worthy failed to him at 54.
Yeah, you know, the speed guys haven't worked out, and I'm trying to think back. I guess Will Fuller with guys with Watson. Will Fuller was really successful. But I don't even know that he.
Do we count Brandon Cooks as a speed guy?
I guess. Is Will Fuller real? I mean, Fuller was. I mean, he is, but it's not like he was a track star kind of guy.
Hey, you know who did work out with Deshaun Watson really well? DeAndre Hopkins. Now, I'm not saying Keon Coleman is DeAndre Hopkins, but the same things that made you hesitant about taking DeAndre Hopkins in the first round are the same things that are making you hesitant about Keon Coleman.
The guy that intrigues me, and I'm curious as to what you think about, what do you think about Corley? Corley, and I think you and I were talking about, he reminds me a little bit of Anquan Bolden as opposed to Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, I worry about when somebody gets those Deebo comps because I know the first thing every offensive coordinator is going to do is make them run a million end arounds. And I'm just not a big fan of the end around anymore. Like, I don't think it fools people anymore. Like, I just think it's a dead play.
Guys are faster. And if defenders are faster.
They're looking for it, too. And you notice the end arounds haven't really worked for Deebo Samuel the last couple of years, right? Like, it's not been something that they can go to. So I worry about when teams kind of get keyed in on that. It's like, oh, are you going to really invest a lot of energy into making this guy do something that's a bit more of a dying breed? Now, where the Browns could use somebody at wide receiver, somebody who can catch a short pass and have that yak ability similar to with David Njoku, because Amari Cooper, he's gonna get yak, but he's not a ton of yak guy. Like, you don't just throw a screen to Amari Cooper. Jerry Jeudy, he's not been that so far in his NFL career, and they tried it with Elijah Moore. It hasn't worked. So when we talk about position versatility, I do think Malachi Corley kind of fits in there because he does play a different style than what we've seen our wide receivers have.
Yeah, and I get it, people will push back and say, well, Western Kentucky, I get that. And that's what, that's the judgment that the Browns have to make. If they think those things translate to the NFL, Corley's an interesting guy. All right, before I let you go, and I know you've addressed this on your show as well, under the radar Browns draft prospects.
Yes, the underrated. I mentioned a lot of them on the offensive line, right? I really like the offensive tackle class this year. Christian Jones is somebody I really implore people to look at. Karan Amagaji from Yale is also somebody that I think people should really take a deep look at. Guys that just we aren't talking about a ton, that aren't really under the radar, but we haven't really thrown in that conversation a ton. Michael Hall, defensive tackle from Ohio State. Probably the most twitchy RAS score guy that you're going to get at the defensive tackle position. We know that the Browns like to draft those kind of DTs, and somebody that I could see, filling the role that Maurice Hurst has on this defensive line long term. And then Ruke Orororo, who's an excellent run defender. I think he's a modern NFL run defender where he's not a giant guy, but he is a long and lean guy. And I think that works when you're talking about the east to west run styles that have really gotten popular in the modern NFL the last couple of years. So I think Ruke is another one that I would look at there. And do I have a wide receiver that's been flying? I mean, Malachi Corley, we just kind of talked about him. I feel like he's somebody that would be in that conversation. But yeah, I think there's a lot of guys that are flying under the radar that, I think since we're so deadlocked into thinking that the Browns have a need here, that Junior Colson, a linebacker out of Michigan, is also somebody I would throw in there too. But we get so locked into thinking they need a specific position, but they could just draft anybody. Like, I think every position's on the board for them except for special teams.
Quincy Carrier, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Quincy.
Thank you, Dave.
Quincy Carrier, make sure you check him out. Always really good Browns coverage and insight. Untitled Unfiltered is his show. Make sure you check it out. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Mac Robinson from 92.3 The Fan, straight ahead. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams. I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Andrew Berry met with the media today, talked about how the Browns view the draft and its impact on the 53-man roster.
It's always full of surprises, and it's really the same thing with players, right? I don't think any of us anticipated going to the season and we would be down, 3 tackles, Nick Chubb and Deshaun Watson for most of the year. That we would lose, Grant Delpit and Juan Thornhill and Rodney Cloud, late in the season. So in terms of spots on the 53 or who's going to play what, like it all looks good in May until adversity hits or something unexpected happens, whether it's injury or performance. Probably more generally, as we think of the current roster relative to the draft has always been about long-term investment in the roster. We don't think of it as, I touched earlier on how rare it is for a player to come in immediately and play at a starting caliber level. We really look at it with, okay, how are these players going to impact, call it the 25 to 27, Cleveland Browns. And if they develop quickly and produce with impact in their rookie season, that's great. We're not going to, DeJuan Jones did that. We're not going to keep them off the field. But we really do look at it as in terms of a long-term investment in the team.
Let's welcome in Mac Robinson from 92.3 The Fan. So when you're looking at the draft, don't look at necessarily the starters. Look at that too deep and look at some of the guys that are a little bit older in that second group.
Yeah, Dave, you're spot on there because, whenever I'm looking at the draft for the Browns, I'm not necessarily thinking of, okay, who's going to come in and immediately play. This isn't the same old Browns that we saw in, the late teens and even in the 2000s as well, where, you would have somebody that gets drafted in day one has to make an impact in rounds 1, 2, 3, and potentially 4. Now at this point, it's, your top 2 draft picks last year were Cedric Tillman and Siaki Ika. And while Tillman got a lot of plays, he didn't make as big of an impact, say, as DeJuan Jones or even their undrafted free agent, Ronnie Hickman, as well. Both of those guys made a massive impact. Hickman was an undrafted free agent. DeJuan Jones fell to day 3 because of other concerns that he had. So, for this draft, and especially drafts going forward, it's not only just the day 1 impact of what a player could potentially do, but also looking at down the road, how do these guys impact the rest of this roster? And also, how do you have some unforeseen things that might shake things up? One, for instance, I know Andrew Berry spoke about today too, was the special teams rules and the new kickoffs, and where, we're going away from maybe that super speedy return man versus somebody who's, more adept to contact. And so now you might see a shift in terms of those players, towards the back end of the roster. That's another area that you need to look out for. And now, especially with this draft class and, with all the different running backs and different receivers, all of a sudden now that's another wrinkle that you have to throw into the mix as well when you're evaluating the entire 53-man roster and how they look at this draft. All right,
Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah had 24 run stuffs, grabbed tackles on 18.3% of his run defense snaps in 2023. 8.3% stuff rate, easily first among qualifying linebackers. He also logged 3.5 sacks, that from Sharp Football Analysis. So when you look at that, so not only was he making an impact in the pass game, but in the run game as well. And the other thing, when he wasn't getting stuffs, he was funneling guys from the backfield into other defenders.
Yeah, and that's the greatness that you see from Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, especially in that linebacker role. He almost plays that hybrid safety where it's the safety that plays up to the line of scrimmage, and he has the speed of a safety, but he has, the physicality of a linebacker and the instinctiveness that you expect out of a great linebacker, where he's able to cut in between offensive linemen, able to, dissect and read the play on the outside, and like you said, direct towards the inside, direct towards his teammates, and direct traffic at that point, in order to create those stuffs in the backfield. And it was almost as routine as we saw big plays from Myles Garrett. You did at least get 1, maybe 2 plays out of JOK every single week that left you speechless with how he was able to stop a lot of those plays, but especially for how he's able to utilize his speed and not only just be, that straight vertical speed type of player, but also be that guy that can stop on a dime and able to adjust and redirect traffic to help his teammates as well. It is such a key cog in that defense for the Browns, and especially, JOK in that draft, in that 2021 draft class, one of the few linebackers that Andrew Berry has taken high, but not only that, the linebacker that he traded up to get. So really bucking both trends for Andrew Berry in terms of draft picks, and clearly to this point, it's worked out well.
All right, Jedrick Wills has only appeared in 8 games last season, but when he was available, he allowed a team-high 9.8% pressure rate, 68th overall grade among tackles last season per PFF. Yet to finish higher than 55th in that grade at his position in any of his first 4 seasons. That, again, from Sharp Football Analysis. Mac, I know Browns fans are really down on Jedrick Wills. I don't think the Browns are. I think they view him as kind of an average and could even develop to an above average left tackle. Just your sense of how the Browns feel about Wills.
Yeah, the thing with Jedrick Wills is he is such an enigma when it comes to, a lightning rod of the fan hatred going towards him. And again, I get it on certain plays where there are plays where, Jedrick Wills will not necessarily finish out all the way on some of those blocks and it causes some of those pressures. But at the same time, too, again, you see the same tools that he had at Alabama as well. And this is the last year of his contract. And especially at that position, and Andrew Berry touched on this a little bit today as well, but the fact that at the tackle position and at the offensive line in general, it is so tough to find talent at that position in particular. And somebody who has the raw talents that you see out of Jedrick Wills, where, again, when he is on and when he is locked in, it is fantastic to see what he's able to do. And it's also a little easier to be picked on when you have, Jack Conklin on the other side or DeJuan Jones with how well he was playing. You have, Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller in the middle, Ethan Posick at center. Greatness along the offensive line really exposes your weakness, and that really has been Jedrick Wills. But I think that for the Browns, they look at that position as being one of high value, and for where they've been picking the last few years, it's tough to see the ability to go up and get one of those top-tier tackles because you either have one or you don't. But at the same time, it's the reason why I think that you've seen the Browns, bring in multiple players throughout this draft process to potentially look at that offensive tackle class. I think that this is a deep offensive tackle class and really could look at that round 2 to 3 range for one of those players. But again, it's potentially looking at the future of that position. And when you look at the key positions that the team values throughout, their guardrails, as we've looked at throughout the years, that is one that is a key position. And again, when you have a talent like Jedrick Wills, I think that you have to roll with it until you're able to get somebody that you can develop into a better prospect.
All right, before we go to break, this tweet from Evan Silva. Browns have the lowest average age draft pick during Andrew Berry's tenure, and it's by far 28 of Berry's 31 picks. That's over 90%. 23 or younger, usually 22 or younger in the early rounds. And again, the reason for that is you want guys to be 26, 27, 28 when they're getting their second contract, not 29 or 30. I think that's going to change, and through nothing other than the fact that the draft eligible players are getting older, because underclassmen are staying in school longer because of the NIL money they can get.
Yeah, you're spot on, Dave. And that's the one thing that, I was thinking about earlier today, too. I know Andrew Berry was talking about it. Just a few years ago, prior to the NIL rules coming in, a lot of times when you saw a player that was transferring, a lot of times you thought it was for disciplinary reasons, and it was for, off-the-field reasons. But now and Andrew Berry mentioned it, it's more surprising when players don't transfer and that they actually stick with the school. And so now getting a chance to see that change, you're seeing players stick around a little bit longer if the draft status isn't high enough, if they're able to get some NIL money. So, I think that for the way that this is kind of played out so far with the Browns, I think that you can tell, like you said, they're trying to make sure that second contract, when that hits, it's a little bit at a younger age so that they can maximize that value. But at the same time, I think that now that you're seeing the NIL rules take shape, and now you're seeing it evolve and now hit the draft process where, we're hitting lows when it comes to underclassmen coming out now at this point. And I think that that is something that is going to be a worthwhile trend going forward, and especially for Andrew Berry this year, too, seeing how they adjust when it comes to the few high draft picks that they have compared to some of the lower draft picks that they have later on in this draft class.
Mac Robinson from 92.3 The Fan and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. We'll continue talking draft, more from Andrew Berry, plus the biggest X factors in the NFL draft. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million ultimate cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns with Mac Robinson from 92.3 The Fan. Andrew Berry talked about his approach to the draft.
We do like to try and get ahead of our roster planning, but it won't solely direct, our draft decisions. I think, more generally, like you have a vision of maybe how the board will fall, or probably more likely how you'd like it to fall. It never falls that way, and so you have to be adaptable and flexible. But look, we'll probably be pretty consistent in terms of the positions that we invest high resources into, and certainly will be the case if we don't maybe have a young player behind behind an older veteran, and it's a key spot for us. But like I said, it won't solely direct it, but it definitely is part of it.
And Mac, those positions are usually tackle, edge, and defensive back. Those are the three that it's like 21%, 14%, or 28%, 20%.
Yeah. Can you catch the ball? Can you cover the receiver? Can you protect the passer? Can you rush the passer? Pretty much just knocking them all out right there. And that's the biggest thing is that, I always love the draft process, especially just because, a lot of people, there will be some that value the combine, some that will solely value the tape. And for me, I look at it as it's entirely a big puzzle where each piece is a factor. And roster construction and roster fit is one that I feel often goes to the wayside. And looking at how Andrew Berry attacks these draft classes is really interesting, in my opinion, just because of the fact that seeing how he will go ahead and attack each of these spots, I think is fascinating because of the fact that, again, we're now at the point now where Myles Garrett is 28 years old, going into his age 29 season at this point. He turns 29 in December. You have these guys that you still think of as being those younger players, whereas now they're those veterans. And you're getting into that next stage of this Browns team, that next evolution. And so getting a chance to see some of these younger players that take those next steps. You can't pay everybody. It's why, I know the name that constantly gets floated around is Greg Newsome. I know Andrew Berry kind of pushed back against potential trade talks for him. But, the way that I look at it is, you have these guys that are valuable. You have these guys that, you can't necessarily pay for each and every one of them. If you're going to pay Greg Newsome, then do you still pay MJ Emerson? Do you still, what are you going to do when it comes to Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who's a free agent next offseason? Where is that extension coming in? And how do you fit all of this underneath the salary cap? Again, that's why those guys are paid much more than I am. But at the same time, I look at how this group is put together and how they attack the draft. And it's why I'm so fascinated when it comes to the preparation standpoint, because, when they're at pick 54, they're the lowest team that doesn't have a first-round pick. But at the same time, they still have to do those mock drafts to see who's available on the board when we pick. How many different variations can we go through? It adds so much to it, and it's why I'm so ecstatic to see how these guys attack it, especially being versatile and adaptable, going on throughout this draft process.
So Dane Brugler from The Athletic did a 7-round mock draft. We're going to take a look at who he has the Browns taken in the first couple rounds. So round 2, pick 54, he goes with Mason Smith, defensive tackle from LSU, 6'5", 300 plus in the trenches, very quick. The other thing, really athletic, so that's interesting. Round 3, he goes with Amagier, the tackle from Yale. So sticks with kind of the offensive defensive line that they like to bolster. The one thing I would say, though, they don't usually draft tackles. It's usually edge rushers that they draft early in the drafts.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that's really interesting about this draft class in particular is because there's a few guys that I find are interesting. Smith is actually a really good Andrew Berry target. Or at least lines up with a lot of what they've kind of looked for over the last few years. And, some of the factors in there as well are, you know, he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. I know the Browns look at a lot of those when it comes to taking a lot of chances on those guys as well. But also comes from a Power 5 school. They usually, you know, will tend to look towards those Power 5 schools in terms of competition. But also, again, that frame, 6'5", 300 pounds. I know that tackle isn't necessarily the one that they tend to look at, but at the same time, seeing how they go ahead and attack that position and how they've really gone after that position this offseason, they only have 2 players under contract past this season. That's Dalvin Tomlinson and Siaki Ika. I know they added in 4 guys that are all on 1-year deals, so it's a little tough to see how they might keep those guys around. Or I'm sorry, 3 players between Mo Hurst, Jefferson, as well as Shelby Harris. But it's tough to see them carrying all 6. But at the same time, having somebody like a Mason Smith that has that big of a body and has that athleticism from a high school, as well as having that pedigree coming out of high school as well, I think that those match up a lot. And then when it comes to Amagaji, the tackle out of Yale, I think he's a project, but at the same time, like we mentioned, talking about, Jedrick Wills, he's somebody who has a lot of tools. I know he's gotten a lot of interest when it comes to the visits and everything like that throughout this draft process. So he's somebody who I can definitely see, and I've been hearing too the fact that, again, you could look to them attacking those tackles both on the offensive and defensive side, really attacking those trenches. And so I feel like, getting a chance to go after some of those guys, even if they don't make an impact year 1, having them ready for year 2, I think is going to be a massive impact.
Mac Robinson, 92.3 The Fan, as always. Great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Mac.
Thank you very much, Dave. Always great chatting with you.
Mac Robinson, make sure you check him out, 92.3 The Fan. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.